And welcome. Good morning. Today, as Juanita mentioned, we're going to explore strategies to make your collaboration work. And this webinar builds on the first webinar in the series that focused on how to be an effective collaboration partner. So the objectives of today's workshops are to explore making your collaboration work by discussing how governance looks different in collaboration. And in our experience, one of the mistakes that partners make is to approach governance, decision-making, and accountability the same way they would in an organization, even though there are some key distinguishing features. We'll also examine how to build trust and address conflict. At its core, collaboration, we all know, is about relationships that need to be developed and nurtured. We suggest that conflict is the byproduct of a healthy relationship and that it can be productive when it's managed effectively. Finally, we'll review components of a collaboration agreement that clarify the shared understanding and commitments amongst partners for future reference and guidance of the collaboration. In order to set the context, I'm going to take a few minutes to clarify some important definitions. We discovered in our research on collaboration that it refers to a diverse range of types, and that there's no standard definition or agreement about what we mean by collaboration. The term collaboration is often used interchangeably with networks, communities of practice, partnerships, and integration. So in our working definition, we suggest that collaboration is a well-defined relationship entered into by two or more different partners, could be individuals, organizations, or networks, coming together from various sectors, groups, and or communities to achieve common goals. So a key element of this definition is the intention of partners to work towards common goals. Authentic collaboration is characterized by a commitment to building, nurturing, and maintaining mutually beneficial relationships, joint responsibility and accountability for success, and the sharing of resources and rewards. And we'll explore each of these further as we examine the strategies to make your collaboration work. When we talk about governance and collaboration, we're really referring to the structures and processes that enable the joint accomplishment of the collaborative goals. So by structures, we mean governance entities. So for instance, the lead agency or the steering committee. Processes provide clarity regarding how these entities will govern. So for instance, what are the roles and responsibilities of partners? How is shared decision-making achieved? And how might conflicts be resolved? So today we're going to explore how governance looks different in collaboration by examining three key and interdependent governance functions: shared decision-making, shared accountability, and shared leadership. And we'll also discuss some practical tips to address the issues and challenges that arise from these differences. So first we want to hear from you. And we're putting up a polling question that you'll see in a minute. And the question is, how many of your current collaborations successfully share decision-making, accountability, and leadership from your perspective? And you'll respond, most of them, some of them, all of them, or you don't really know. We'll just give a few minutes for you to have the opportunity to respond to the polling question. Okay, it looks like you've had difficulty being able to show the polls. So what I'm going to suggest is that you take this question back to your organization and answer it in the context of the material that we're going to present. And you can even, as we're following through the material, do your own check-in around how you would rate current collaborations around their capacity here. So what are key distinguishing features of governance and collaboration? Well, first, it's complex, and we experience this in our day-to-day work in collaboration. It's complex because it's made up of multiple and often diverse and autonomous organizations who are charged with negotiating shared decisions that are in the best interest of the collaboration. And in order to achieve consensus, the collaboration has to ensure that the needs and interests of the partners, their organizations, and the collective goals are considered and satisfied at all levels. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda now to talk about how decision-making looks different in a collaboration.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say is that all of you do all kinds of decision-making every day as part of your work and life. And all of those typical kind of decision-making processes and what you've learned about decision-making holds up in collaboration, of course. So what we really want to focus on is how decision-making is really different in a collaboration than your ongoing kind of decision-making that you do all the time. And really, the best way to describe how it's different is think of decision-making in sort of a hyperdrive when you're working collaboration. Of course, the more partners that you have, the more partners that are involved in the collaboration. I mean, if you're working with one other organization in partnership to try to coordinate your services, for example, that's going to require easier decision-making than if you have multiple partners all sitting around the table trying to make it work. If you're trying to deal with something more complex, that's going to make decision-making different in collaboration and more challenging. But even if you're dealing with one other partner, one other organization, and you're trying to create work collaboratively, here are some things to think about as you go through your processes of decision-making. Things that you're going to need to consider are, first of all, that there are going to be varying kinds of experience of people sitting at the table. So the different kinds of experience can relate to things like different cultures that you may come from. It may be that you come from different values. You may come from different worldviews or perspectives. And of course, you're going to come from different experiences in terms of the history of your organization and the kind of stakeholders that you have. But you also may find in collaboration, and it has a big impact on decision-making, that you can have people sitting around the table that play different roles or have different positions within your collaboration, and you've got to take that into consideration. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some ways to deal with some of these issues that emerge in governance decision-making for collaboration. The second in collaboration is that decision-making is shared. Now, that may seem obvious, but most of us have worked almost primarily in traditional, more hierarchical decision-making, where somebody makes a decision and it goes up through whatever the proper processes are within the organization. But in collaboration, even if it's between two partners, it's more complex because it's shared. So it may be that people will contribute different things in the collaboration, and so there may not be equal contributions by everybody, although everyone should be bringing different strengths and resources. But at the end of the day, in collaborations, decision-making, really everybody's going to need to be part of that decision-making. So you're going to have to think about what that structured decision-making is and what processes you can put in place to make sure that everybody is participating equally in that decision-making. Another part, a distinguishing feature of decision-making collaboration is it's based on what is good for the collaborative. Again, may seem obvious, but that is more complex because not only do you have different people sitting around the table, all of whom have their own interests that must be met and needs, but you have whole organizations whose interests and needs must be met. But at the end of the day, what it'll come down to in decision making is being sure that decisions are made based on what is good for the whole collaborative. So that makes it more complex as well. Another key feature of decision making in collaboration that distinguishes it is it's more challenging, more tricky to find a balance between efficiency with inclusion. And by that I mean that there will always be a desire to be as inclusive as possible, and we've talked about the importance of shared decision making and the equity that will need to be put in place around that kind of decision making. So you need to be very inclusive. But at the same time, what we have seen in some of the collaborations that we worked with is that in the need to be inclusive, in fact, some collaborations become almost paralyzed and decisions aren't made. And many of you may have experienced that, where you find that we've been very, very consultative, but at the end of the day, it takes a very, very long time to arrive at what that decision might be. I've even heard of one organization that actually took 3 years in working in partnership to arrive at a policy that everybody found acceptable to them, and by the time that everybody arrived at that policy, the context for the policy had changed so much they had to go back to the drawing board. So that may sound familiar to some of you. So it's a balancing act between finding greater efficiency and being inclusive, and we're going to talk some more about that. Another part of that is making sure in your decision making that by being inclusive, that you don't arrive at the end of the day with simply the best compromised position between all the points of view versus what is really the best decision for the collaborative itself. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do about that. First of all, it's to acknowledge and appreciate that collaborative decision-making takes a very, very high degree of trust. I mean, all decision-making takes a high degree of trust, but in collaboration, it's more important, we have found, than in any other kind of decision-making. So you're going to need to create an environment when you are making decisions that feels open, and you're going to need to particularly pay attention to the communications to make sure that people are receiving accurate information, it's received in a timely way, and that people really find that the information helps them in that decision making. And that's going to go a great distance to being able to build that trust. There's nothing that breaks down trust in decision making more quickly than if some people are receiving different kinds of information or not receiving in a timely way. So really important piece is to focus on that area of trust and make sure whenever decisions are made that you're creating that environment that will focus on building trust. Another really important part of making decision-making work is to have a clear delineation, clarity of roles and responsibilities, and then a continuous renewal of your outcomes. And so in this, you need to really think about what it is that each organization is responsible for, what their roles will be, so that is very clear. And you're going to need to do that at all kinds of different stages in the partnership or the collaboration. At the very beginning, your role definition and responsibilities will need to be made clear. And then as you renew the outcomes of what it is that you're going to try to achieve, you're going to need to go back and continuously clarify those roles and responsibilities so that those are very visible and everybody understands them. And in our experience, when people come in, when people ask us to come in and say we've got some real issues, we seem to be making the wrong decisions, or we've got ourselves in a bind because the wrong decisions were made, we can often trace it right back to people weren't clear about what those roles and responsibilities were. Another part of that, and it's linked to roles and responsibilities, is to make sure that all the partners, even if there are just 2 organizations involved, each of the partners feel empowered. And by that I mean they need to be able to come to the table ready and able to make decisions and to manage the self-interest that will creep into conversations around their organizations. So you might know that partners aren't feeling empowered in decision making. For example, if a decision is made and you spend some time working with your partners or collaborators to make a decision, and then the minutes come out and action is taken and decisions are made, and then you may find, particularly if they're controversial decisions, that one of your partners says, well, actually, I now have to take that back and check with the organization whether or not that we can live with that decision. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but that's sort of a common piece, and that tells you that, in fact, those partners aren't being empowered by their own organization to sit at the table and make decisions. And part of that empowering partners, and we talk much more about that in our first webinar, is that you have the right person at the table and that the organization has given the power and authority to go and make decisions on behalf of the collaboration. And when decisions may be controversial or may cause some challenges, that that partner is very clear when they need to go back and check in. Okay, some other things that you can do to help with decision making in your collaboration or partnership is to provide training and mentoring. And I think this is especially true if you have people sitting around the table with different experiences. I mean, many of your organizations have been doing partnerships and collaborations for years and years. So collaboration and partnerships aren't new to you, but you may have some people sitting around the table who've been involved in lots of collaborations and some who haven't been involved at all. So really think about what kind of training might help them to understand this different kind of decision making that is required in collaboration, and set up kind of a mentoring program with somebody who is sitting at your table, who's had lots of experience, that helps somebody along to think about how decision making is different in collaboration. Another thing that will be very important to do is to facilitate consensus and make sure that decision making is transparent and intentional. So let's start with the consensus part. Now, by consensus, I'm meaning consensus is when people around the table agree to something or they agree to support something. So that's a key kind of definition of consensus. Now, in your collaboration or partnership, not every decision necessarily needs to be consensus. So you really need to sit down and think about what decision needs to be made. If it's a decision that is going to have high impact on all of your partners, then you're really going to have to take the time to make sure you do arrive at consensus. There'll be other decisions that you can agree that we can do it just as a majority because it does not have the same kind of impact. And make sure that when those decisions then are made, that those decisions are captured accurately in your minutes or your reporting, and that they're very transparent as to what led to them and what the actual decision is. Again, I've seen lots of collaborations where good decisions are made and then they're not made clear to everybody, and that's when partners can pull out and say, gee, I actually didn't agree to that decision. And also I've seen collaborations where decision making isn't intentional. So in other words, people sit around, have a coffee, have a conversation about something that a decision is made, and people will come back and say, but we didn't sit down and go through kind of a formal process to arrive at that decision. So make sure it's intentional and visible. Also, constantly attend, and back to the trust issue, attend to the relationship dynamics. A really important part of this is people, again, will call us in and say we're having real trouble sort of making decisions and we need help in terms of our governance structure or processes. And guess what we find in the room? The big elephant sitting there on the table is based on some of the trust issues. So it isn't about governance structure. It isn't always about processes. You may have those in place, but you need to go back and really think about that trust issue and the relationship dynamics. So those are some of the things that distinguish collaboration, decision-making, and also some of the things that you can do about it. Now, we have another poll here, but it's not set up for you to be able to participate in that poll. But again, you may bring this to your collaboration or partnership table and ask the question of your partners, how successfully do our current collaboration, how successfully do we think we hold each other accountable for getting the work done? Because linked very much to the area of decision making is the issue of accountability, and we're going to talk about that now. So if you take this to the table, I think it's going to help get a sense of where people think you are in decision making and also where you think people are around the next topic, which is governance accountability. And as Heather said at the very beginning, decision-making, accountability, and leadership are all very intertwined and linked. In fact, they're sometimes hard to pull apart. So I think that's an important part to remember, that when we talk about accountability, if you don't have good decision-making, if you haven't thought about leadership, accountability isn't going to work either. So how is accountability different in a collaboration? Again, all of you work in organizations, you all know about accountability, probably know more about accountability and report writing than anyone should ever have to know in their lifetime, and that's true within an organization. However, when you have different partners, not only do you have to think about the external requirements, you also have to think about how are we holding each of our partners accountable for those commitments. And so that's what we're going to focus our attention on. So first of all, what distinguishes accountability in collaborations that's different than the accountability that you work on every day in your own organization? Well, it's often multiple and complex accountabilities are involved. You have the accountability of each individual to deliver on the roles and responsibilities and expectations that they have promised in coming into the partnership. You also have the accountabilities of the partner organizations, and you've got to meet those accountabilities, and the accountabilities your organization may have to deliver on could be very distinct than the accountabilities of another organization. Of course, it depends on who your stakeholders are and how you receive your funding. So you've got to think about that level of accountability. And finally, and most importantly, you have to think about the accountability for the promised results of your collaboration or partnership results. And that's where that mutual accountability comes into play and somewhat distinguishes it from what you might be used to in your organization. The other, and this is such a key one, is in collaboration, there's no real stick there's nothing to say we must be accountable to each other or for the results. There are carrots that can pull you along to hold each other accountable. And this is important because a collaboration or a partnership isn't an organization. There isn't a board who says that here's the accountability and here's how to deliver it. You don't have the same ability to let people go. Of course, you can change partners, but you don't have that same ability to use power and authority in the collaboration to make sure that accountability happens. So let's talk about some of the tips that allow you around governance accountability to deal with those. The first is to, at the very beginning of the relationships that you might have, and then throughout, to clarify to whom you are accountable. So that's going to be multiple accountabilities of all the organizations sitting at the table. To be very clear, in another column you might put for what each is accountable and how it is to be met. And what you're going to have is a piece of paper at the end, or maybe a few pieces of paper, depending on how many partnerships you have, that lists all of those accountabilities, and that matrix is going to give you a clear picture of what you have to deliver on. The other is to ensure ownership for results and clarity about expectations. And the way that you create ownership for results is you have people participate in an intentional and transparent way in decision making, so that at the end of the day they really own not only what the decisions are, but the outcomes that you're working to achieve, and that will require a consultative process. But you've got to have that ownership for results, so people aren't able to say around the table, well, yeah, those outcomes are fine, but they're really not the ones that I'm here to achieve. So deep ownership and real clarity about expectations. If you don't have that and you don't continuously define that throughout the relationship, you're going to have some trouble along the way keeping each other accountable. The other is to, and this is for keeping each other with partners within the collaboration or partnership accountable, create meaningful incentives and consequences for partners not fulfilling their commitments. So again, lots of organizations will say, when we go in and talk about creating incentives and consequences, they say, well, we're just lucky to have people sitting around the table. We can't possibly have consequences for partners not fulfilling their commitment, but you will waste a lot of time and resources unless you have those consequences. The consequences, of course, can range from understanding what some of the barriers are that get in the way of people being able to deliver on their commitments, right through to, if a partner is not continuously fulfilling their commitment, having consequences of asking them to leave. And of course, that's linked to being able to, on an ongoing basis, evaluating the contributions that each of the partners make. So that's the area of accountability, and now I'm going to hand it back to Heather to talk about leadership.
Okay, so Linda's very nicely taken us through how does decision making and accountability look different in a collaboration, and I'm going to come back now to how does leadership look different. So in collaboration, leadership is shared by multiple diverse and autonomous partners, as many partners as is feasible. And as we've been saying, unlike in a single organization, you can't lead through directives and bureaucratic controls. So leaders must then adopt different kinds of skills and capacities. So for instance, they're stewards, not owners, of the collective resources. They're called to broker opportunities, connect people, and create relationships. They facilitate the accomplishment of outcomes, not just implement them. They mediate conflicts between diverse interests and concerns, and they know when to step aside so others have the opportunity to lead. So leadership and collaboration means very different things than it does in a formal accountability structure where a leader typically is a single defined individual. So what are some tips around governance leadership then? The definition of lead is to guide from out in front, but we know that that doesn't work in collaboration. So it's important to acknowledge that new and different leadership skills are required, as we've just discussed in the previous slide. Once you think about those skills, you can invest in coaching and building the capacity of various leaders to develop core skills that will help them to be successful both individually and collectively as a leadership team. It's beneficial to evaluate leadership performance as a key part of the overall performance evaluation, and also to demonstrate a commitment to acknowledging and learning from mistakes as you move forward. As we've said in many ways, relationships are at the heart of successful collaboration, so it's important to build trust between partners and to identify and effectively manage conflict when it arises. So here are some tips. Creating space for open, transparent, and honest communication, and appreciating debate and naming elephants. So for example, if your organization has capacity issues, you may not be able to designate somebody to sit at the collaboration and really fulfill the role, or your organization has very specific expectations about outcomes. It's really important to put them on the table so they can be jointly understood and negotiated amongst partners. We know that in the absence of open communication, partners will make assumptions that may not be accurate about what your organization's agenda and expectations are. Secondly, recognize strengths and assets. So when selecting or even just reviewing your partners, be sure that everyone has something to contribute and to gain. Trust often erodes when not everyone is seen to be pulling their weight in the collaboration, so this is really important. And finally, share credit for outcomes and success. And just a story here to illustrate this. In one collaboration that I was involved in supporting, the collaboration actually said at a key point that the first real sign that they were truly working well as a collaboration was when the media approached them around a successful outcome they'd achieved. And the lead agency, rather than taking the credit for that, brought that to the collaborative partners and said, this is the result of a shared effort, and we need to celebrate and be acknowledged for that success jointly. Check in regularly with your values to be sure that in your work together you're guided by the core values that you jointly negotiated, and be clear about what it looks like to live the values in your day-to-day work and interactions. So what are the behaviors that you expect? What would others identify if they were to observe the work of the collaboration? Discuss in advance a transparent and reasonable process that all partners can support to effectively manage conflict and resolve disputes. And you know that they're inevitably going to arise. It's just, as we've said, a natural byproduct of a healthy collaboration. The analogy here is developing a good prenuptial agreement. Often I think collaborations think all's well, we all understand each other, but we know from experience that things change, partners change, understandings changed, etc. And so it's really important to have something to come back to guide the work. And finally, establish objective feedback and evaluation mechanisms that will provide some really useful, meaningful information about how the collaboration is working and what issues need to be addressed moving forward. The collaboration agreement is the place where the processes that we've discussed related to decision-making, accountability, roles and responsibilities are articulated, and it provides the opportunity to clarify the understanding and commitments for future reference and for guidance for the partners. So we've identified a list here for you of the key terms and conditions that an agreement should consider, and it's important to jointly negotiate them at the table with partners before you attempt to write the agreement. We've seen sometimes people will say, can you just give us an agreement, and then we see the lead agency go away and try and write that and bring it to the table. And we know that it's important to take the time up front to engage in a facilitated discussion to develop a strong collaboration agreement that everyone will have buy-in to. Also important to consider the comprehensiveness of the collaboration agreement, and that it should correspond to the nature of the collaboration. So if it's a very intense collaboration, a service collaboration, for example, you may need to articulate very clear and specific terms and conditions in a way that you wouldn't for something that's less intense and complex. Sorry, I forgot to just walk through what the various pieces of the agreement are. So there's the shared values, the outcomes, the joint outcomes, strategies or actions, and the timeline. So when do you expect to achieve these? Is it over a period of a year or multiple years? And then you want to think about the roles and responsibilities with respect to meeting those outcomes and timelines. Is everyone clear? And it's not just for the partners, it's also for the staff that may be hired or seconded to the collaboration as well. Who do they report to? Is everyone clear about that? Then you want to think about policies and procedures, processes that will guide the collaboration. So for instance, resolving conflict, some of the things actually in the list here are examples of policies, procedures. One of the challenges is people have their own organizational policies, and then there are things that the collaboration itself needs to be guided by. So you need to be clear about which you're responsible to for any given situation or issue. You want to explore and be clear about the communication mechanisms or vehicles between partners. So How often are you going to meet? How do you communicate with each other between formal meetings, etc. Risk management provisions. So you want to have thought ahead about what are the potential risks and how are you going to mitigate those through your work. What are the processes that will achieve that? You want to look at decision-making processes. So Linda talked about this earlier. You know, what consensus means. What's the process to achieve that? What happens if you can't reach consensus? Resolving conflicts and complaints. So what's the process when you reach an impasse and you can't solve a conflict that arises? What's the process to work through there? Finances and administration, so who receives funds, who manages funds, who's responsible to report back to funders around the administration of the funds and the outcomes related to the funding. Addressing proposed changes to the collaboration. So if at a point when you're reviewing the partners, it's clear that a partner needs to step away or a different partner needs to bring new competencies around achievement of the ongoing goals, you need to talk about the process to make those changes within the collaboration. Involvement of program participants and community members. So, you know, typically collaboration involves a number of other stakeholders outside the partners themselves. So what's the process for engaging and connecting and following up with all those stakeholders in the collaboration? And finally, the evaluation plan. So, you know, what are the indicators you're going to use to measure progress towards the outcomes? What are the ways in which you're going to bring that information about evaluation back to inform your work and changes to the work moving forward? Okay, so we want to remind you that, and we spoke about this at the last webinar, you can access a free online resource called Collaboration Coach that we developed in collaboration with the Ontario Community Support Association through a grant from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Here you'll find answers to common questions, practical tools, many of which speak to some of the things we've talked about today, and some insightful stories for new or mature collaborations. So the resource is now launched, and we've given you here the URL to find that. In this Creating Shared Governance, you'll find tools related to many of the topics we've covered today, including designing the right collaboration governance, developing a collaboration agreement, and keys to governance success, and many others. In the Building Effective Relationships section, you'll find keys to success around building trust and managing conflict, and a suggested process to resolve conflict, and many other tools there as well. So we really hope you'll go and explore that and follow up to what you've learned through the webinar series. I want to say thank you for joining us today, and we invite you to feel free to contact us directly if you're interested in any individual coaching or customized workshops or webinars, either for your organization or at collaboration tables that you're a part of. And we want to say thanks to OCASI and the Org-Wide Standards Project for sponsoring this webinar series. As Juanita mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these are being recorded for future reference and will be up shortly. So we want to invite you to let your colleagues within your organization and in other interested organizations know that these are available. So thank you very much, everybody, and good luck with your collaboration work.